Good day, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar about the Clean Resource Innovation Network's $50 million Reducing Environmental Footprint Technology Competition, powered by Emissions Reduction Alberta. Before I move on, in the spirit of respect, reconciliation, and truth, I would like to acknowledge that we live, work, and play on traditional land. As this is a virtual event, we acknowledge that attendees are located across the country, but I myself and the ERA team here are located on Treaty 6 territory and a traditional meeting ground and home for many Indigenous peoples, including Cree, Saulteaux, and Métis. The City of Edmonton is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4. All of us at CRIN encourage you to research what traditional land you are situated on and look at making or even finding your own land acknowledgement to use. So thank you for that. My name is Mark Summers, and I'm the Executive Director of Technology and Innovation for Emissions Reduction Alberta, or ERA. Today, I'm joined by Joy Romero and Jason Switzer. Joy is the President of CRIN and also Vice President of Technology and Innovation with Canadian Natural. And Jason is the Vice Chair for CRIN and also Executive Director for the Alberta Clean Technology Industry Alliance, also known as ACTIA. And later on during the Q&A session, we'll also be joined by Ian and Danielle from the CRIN team, and also by Michelle and Janice, who will be moderating the Q&A session. Now, before we get into the agenda, I'd like to start by going through just a few housekeeping items in order to make sure we get the most out of our time today. First of all, we're expecting a few hundred participants today. We're already up past 200, so everyone's microphone is muted to avoid unintentional background noise. If you encounter any technical challenges related to the webinar connection, please feel free to email my colleague Kevin using kduncan@eralberta.ca, and he will try to help where he can. If unfortunately you can't resolve your technical issues, or if you need to leave early, we will be posting a recording of this webinar on ERA's website. It will be uploaded to the specific page for the Reducing Environmental Footprint Technology Competition, which can be found through a link right on ERA's homepage. The recording will include both the presentation and the live Q&A with audio. In terms of an agenda for today's webinar, we plan to cover a few items over the next hour that will hopefully be helpful for everyone on the line. First, Joy and Jason will talk briefly about CRIN and its mandate as Canada's Clean Resource Innovation Network. Next, I'll go through some slides and provide an overview of the Reducing Environmental Footprint Technology Competition. I'll cover some key points regarding scope and eligibility for the competition. I'll talk about the submission process and timelines around the funding decision. I'll also provide some advice for anyone who's interested in making a submission. And finally, we'll end off by answering some of your questions. So if you have any questions you'd like us to address, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel, located on the right-hand side typically. We'll answer as many questions as we can. We're aiming for at least half of the time to be dedicated to Q&A. But if we don't address your question, you are most welcome to follow up with us afterward. With that, it is my pleasure to turn things over to Joy and Jason. All right, over to you.
Hello, bonjour. I'm Joy Romero, President of the Clean Resource Innovation Network, or CRIN, and Vice President of Technology and Innovation at Canadian Natural Resources Limited.
And I'm Jason Switzer, Executive Director of the Alberta Clean Technology Industry Alliance, as well as Vice Chair of CRIN. Bienvenue, and welcome to CRIN's $50 million Reducing Environmental Footprint Technology Competition.
This competition is one of three in CRIN's $80 million program for 2021, aimed at priority environmental and economic challenges within Canada's oil and gas sector, and made possible by the Government of Canada's Strategic Innovation Fund, SIF.
We're very pleased to be here today to welcome you, technology developers, entrepreneurs, researchers, innovators, and oil and gas producers and service providers from across Canada. This is truly a pan-Canadian cross-sectoral opportunity.
And a special welcome to participants from other sectors like mining, steel, cement, forestry, agriculture, and manufacturing, and a few from other countries as well. The competition guides provide details on eligibility, but rest assured they are designed to enable diverse participation. Cross-sector applications are important considerations for designing and marketing solutions, so all are welcome. Each of you have projects at technology readiness levels, or TRLs, 6 through 9, which means you and your teams have already worked hard and invested for many years to get to this point. CRIN's competitions are designed to help bring your work through the commercialization stage to widespread adoption. Reaching this phase of development is an exciting achievement for any project. For industry, these competitions could accelerate your R&D efforts through the commercialization stage, while also leveraging your existing funding, improving investor awareness of your sustainability efforts, and improving cost competitiveness for your operations.
For innovators, your technology put into the field will help meet our nation's emissions reduction targets, build resilience to a changing climate, and improve both competitiveness and environmental performance of Canadian companies. And validation by Canada's oil and gas sector will de-risk your technology for investors and for other public funders. Together, as part of this effort, you are creating a body of work and developing knowledge and skills that can help position Canada's clean tech industry as a global leader, proven on the ground here and ready for export, poised to attract additional investment. In short, participation matters, and it matters that we all work together to make it happen. There is no single area or single project that's going to solve the environmental and economic challenges that we face. Only by working together through networks like CRIN's and by engaging diverse perspectives and approaches will we be able to achieve Canada's climate goals.
This is what CRIN is all about. We are a pan-Canadian network of networks focused on ensuring Canada's energy resources can be sustainably developed and integrated into global energy systems. We facilitate connections and amplify ideas and expertise that will produce breakthrough solutions for global challenges. CRIN's mandate to develop the innovation ecosystem and facilitate pathways that enable technology development and faster adoption.
So, solution providers, by working within this network and collaborating with Canada's oil and gas industry, you are extremely well positioned to make a huge impact. While the industry is a large contributor to global emissions, it is also the largest private sector investor in Canada's R&D, contributing in some years up to 75% of the total invested each year, according to research by Global Advantage. And it is committed to innovation in support of a clean hydrocarbon. Your work here can contribute meaningfully to the global energy transformation while also helping Canada to compete.
Producers play an important role in working with technology developers to test and finalize the large-scale projects that are successful in the competitions. Because all of your projects are at TRL 6 through 9, you likely already have industry partners. However, if you don't, please reach out to the competition coordinators who will then work within the CRIN network to try and find a match for you.
Speaking of communication and other processes, this is a good time to mention the fairness, confidentiality, and IP protections that are in place. You will hear more about this shortly, but each of CRIN's competitions is administered by an independent coordinator who recruits and screens all reviewers for technical expertise and for conflict of interest. External fairness monitors oversee the entire competition process, and CRIN volunteer members have been kept at arm's length to avoid conflict of interest or insider advantage, and to allow the more than 2,100 members of CRIN's network to compete on a level playing field. But you do need to become a member of CRIN in order to compete.
Unfortunately, not every applicant project will receive funds from CRIN's large-scale competitions. This is not a reflection of the value of your work, nor of the potential for significant environmental, economic, and public benefits to come from your projects. In addition to the competitions, please make use of your CRIN membership to connect, collaborate, and partner with others across the innovation ecosystem for ideas, skills, guidance, and even other sources of funding to complete your projects.
Today's webinar will provide you with all of the details you'll need to apply. Thank you everyone for being here, for your interest in the Clean Resource Innovation Network, and for accelerating innovation in Canada's oil and gas sector, and for your participation in the upcoming competitions. We wish you all the best of luck. Nous vous souhaitons les meilleures chances. Last but not least, thank you to the hardworking team at Emissions Reduction Alberta, the administrators of this competition, and our hosts for today's event. And with that, we'll turn it back to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Jason, and thank you, Joy. I understand that there may have been a few attendees for which the audio was not working when Joy and Jason were speaking. I apologize if this was the case for you. I can say that the audio will be included in the recording, so I encourage anyone who didn't hear Joy and Jason to review the recording afterward. As you've heard, or as you may not have heard, CRIN is seeking innovative technology solutions for Canada's oil and gas industry. Technology solutions that will improve environmental performance, support economic growth, and create high-value jobs, and also improve the competitiveness of Canadian companies. I should note that I'm here because, as Joy and Jason mentioned, ERA is supporting the process as coordinator of this competition and accepting applications on behalf of CRIN. All right, a little bit about the competition. Let me first say that, as Joy and Jason talked about, this is the first of 3 competitions being launched by CRIN. The second competition was launched last week, focused on low emissions fuel and products with up to $25 million available. An information webinar, much like this one, is being held in 2 weeks from today. I encourage everyone to check out Foresight's website to learn more and to register for that webinar. The third technology competition from CRIN will be focused on digital oil and gas technology with up to $5 million available and will be launched later this month. So for this competition, up to $50 million in total funding is being made available. The focus of this competition is reducing the environmental footprint of Canada's oil and gas industry, and I'll dive into that in a minute. But I wanted to state right up front that the deadline for submissions is Thursday, May 20th at 5 p.m. Pacific time. I also want to reiterate what Jason said, that this competition is open only to CRIN members. But the good news is that becoming a CRIN member is free, is easy, and is full of benefits, as Joy talked about, even beyond the ability to apply for funding. And maybe the last thing I'll mention here for everyone's benefit is that applicant organizations are most welcome to apply to each of the 3 CRIN technology competitions if you have separate projects that fit each of the competitions. However, any individual project may not receive funding from more than one CRIN competition. So we encourage you to review each of the competitions in detail and apply only to the competition best aligned with any particular proposed project. You can visit CRIN's website and look under the competitions tab for more information. Also, I recommend signing up for CRIN's email newsletter to make sure you hear about any funding announcements or other beneficial CRIN information. You'll find a link to sign up for this newsletter on the CRIN homepage. So, as has been mentioned, this competition is targeting innovative technology solutions for Canada's oil and gas industry that improve environmental performance and support Canada's clean energy goals set out by the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. Proposals are invited for technology related to Canada's oil and gas industry, including both new developments and retrofit opportunities for existing operations. The technology focus areas for this competition include water technology development, land and well site remediation, novel hydrocarbon extraction, and finally, methane emissions monitoring, quantification, and abatement. Further detail about each of these technology focus areas can be found in the competition guide document. Let me say, if you only take one thing away from today's webinar, the most important advice I can give you is to read the competition guide document. All right, let's talk about the funding available for a minute. As I mentioned, there is a total of $50 million available through this competition, with up to $10 million for any individual project. The maximum funding from CRIN can be no more than 50% of the project's eligible expenses. And there's an eligible expense guidelines attached as an appendix to the competition guide document. A minimum of 25% of contribution toward those eligible expenses must come from industry partners, and the remaining 75% can come from a mix of public and private sources, including CRIN. And maybe the final thing I'll mention on this slide is that it's really important for applicants to justify not only the request for funding, but also the amount that is being applied for. In some cases, CRIN has the ability to, and may indeed, award funding for less than the requested amount. The notion of TRL was mentioned already by Joy and Jason. In terms of the stage of development for this competition, or technology readiness level, TRL if you will, CRIN is seeking projects at the stages of TRL 6 through 9. The TRLs are described here and in more detail in the competition guide, but in essence, we're looking for technology that has been proven in concept and is ready for large-scale, meaningful pilot or demonstration projects in a relevant environment or an operational environment, and also commercial demonstrations and first-of-kind commercial implementation projects. I will note that defining TRL for any individual project can sometimes be as much of an art as it is a science. And so it is incumbent upon you, the applicants, to make the case that your technology and your project ultimately fits within the range of technology readiness levels described here and in the competition guide. While it's inferred here, I should probably note explicitly that funding is being made available for capital P projects. That is, we want to see projects with clear objectives and well-defined milestones, deliverables, and timelines. We want projects that take a technology from point A to point B on its development toward commercialization. All right, in terms of eligible applicants, essentially any type of organization or entity that's a CRIN member can be a lead applicant on a project. This is not an exhaustive list on the slide here, but that does include, for example, technology developers, innovators, industry operators, industrial associations, academic institutions, large multinational corporations, and of course, small and medium-sized enterprises. However, and this is very important, in order to be eligible for funding in this competition, a project must have at least one SME partner and at least one oil and gas producer on the project team. Now, the SME doesn't necessarily need to be the technology provider, the technology developer, or the innovator, but every project must have an SME and an oil and gas producer, in addition to any number of other valuable partners like academic collaborators or industrial associations or others. I suspect we'll get some questions about this. Okay, let's talk about the location of projects funded through this competition. And let me just reiterate, if it's all right, that this competition is designed specifically to support pan-Canadian projects and pan-Canadian economic activity. So while technology really can originate from anywhere, in this competition it must be piloted, demonstrated, or implemented in Canada or anywhere in Canada. And just to put a finer point on that, as a rule, at least 90% of total eligible costs for a funded project must be incurred here in Canada. That means costs occurring outside of Canada cannot exceed 10% of the total eligible costs for each funded project. Ultimately, all projects supported through this competition must demonstrate a clear and justified value proposition for environmental, economic, and public benefits in Canada. Okay, so let me run through the evaluation process to help give you a sense for what's going to happen after today's webinar until the end of the competition. As you can see in the diagram, we will be using a two-stage evaluation process followed by execution of the project. In the expression of interest stage, applicants are invited to provide an overview of their proposed project. This is a relatively short document with a 10-page limit and must be submitted using our online system by the May 20th deadline. Please note, and I'll repeat this again, that we will not extend the deadline and we will not accept late submissions. After all the EOIs have been submitted, they will all be evaluated by a team of independent experts with subject matter expertise in business, financing, science, engineering, and environmental benefits quantification. After the EOI evaluation process, a short list of projects will be invited to submit a full project proposal, or FPP, which includes more detail about the technology, the proposed project, and the expected outcomes of the project. At the full proposal stage, an advisor from the ERA team will be assigned to each proposal in order to help guide applicants through the process and to provide feedback if requested for both the full proposal as well as the oral presentations while they're both under development. After the full proposals are submitted, they are again evaluated by an independent team of experts, and all applicants at this stage will be invited to offer a presentation to the entire evaluation team. This process ultimately culminates with an in-depth review meeting where all projects are discussed in a fair amount of detail, and a recommendation is brought forward to CRIN for a final funding decision. After the CRIN funding decisions are made, CRIN will then enter into a legal agreement with each of the successful applicants, and that agreement will detail the terms and obligations of each party as it relates to CRIN's contribution and to the recipient's completion of the project. CRIN's funding will be distributed on a milestone by milestone basis, and the progress of each project will be monitored and reported to CRIN throughout the course of the project. At the end of each project, all recipients will be required to produce a final outcomes report, which is ultimately shared publicly for the broader benefit of Canada. And maybe the final thing to note on this slide, as mentioned by Jason previously, is that the entire process is being overseen by an independent fairness monitor who ensures that all applicants are treated in a fair and impartial manner. And the timelines for this process are shown here. Everything related to the evaluation and submission process will happen between now and December of this year. The deadline for submitting an expression of interest, again, is May 20th, 2021 at 5 p.m. Pacific time, and that's 5 p.m. sharp. Please note that our online system will automatically close submission functionality right at 5 p.m. And also please note that this is 5 p.m. Pacific time. I know we have attendees from across the country, and so I want to reiterate that that is 5 p.m. Pacific time. Again, and I'm sorry to repeat this, but please note that we will not be extending the deadline and we will not accept late submissions. Once you've submitted your application, you'll receive an email from the system to confirm your submission has been received. If you submit your application and you don't receive that email, well, maybe first check your spam folder or your junk mail folder. And if it's not there, please go back and double check that your submission was properly completed. It may very well be, and we've seen this in the past, that something was missing or incorrectly completed. This is why we strongly encourage you to get your submissions in early. Sometimes hiccups do happen. After the EOI stage, projects that are shortlisted will be notified in August of this year and will have until October to provide a full project proposal. The exact dates and the deadline will be provided in the full project proposal guide document. Oral presentations will be scheduled in November, and successful applicants will be notified by CRIN in December of this year, before the end of the year. It's worth noting that all projects funded through this competition must be completed before or on March 31st, 2024. This includes all project activities, reporting, submission of final deliverables to CRIN, and all other obligations outlined in the legal agreement, which we call an ultimate recipient agreement in the competition guide document. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about before we take your questions is some advice on how to prepare a successful proposal. First, I would recommend that you start the process now. From now until the submission deadline, there is 6 weeks and a day, I guess technically a day and a half, and that can go fast. We know that it doesn't take 6 weeks to write a 10-page document and expression of interest. However, it does take time to forge partnerships, to get internal approvals, and to allocate resources. And while you don't need to have every internal approval and every partnership finalized by the EOI submission deadline, the further along you are in those processes, the better off you are in terms of demonstrating that your project is real and is ready to advance. Since all submissions need to be completed through ERA's online portal, I would recommend that you go there and register an account if you don't already have one. If you do have an account, please go back and make sure that you can still log on. Okay, next, and I really can't emphasize this enough, is please read the competition guide on the competition webpage. It's not a long document, and it honestly answers most of the questions we get on a regular basis. If you have a project that is not eligible or doesn't fit with this technology competition, you can save yourself a lot of time by reading the competition guide and the frequently asked questions document and figuring that out early so you don't submit an expression of interest that does not align with this competition. Okay, so this next point is really an extension of the last one, and that is to review the evaluation criteria, which are provided again in that competition guide. These are the criteria upon which each proposal will be evaluated and shortlisted. And each of these criteria have different weightings. While they're all important and all need to be addressed, I would encourage you to consider the weightings of the criteria when completing your application so you have a sense for what the most important information is at this stage. And as a final note, I just want to remind everyone that as a pan-Canadian competition, we are very pleased to accept proposals in either official language, French or English. However, I should note that applications must be submitted completely in French or completely in English, including the EOI document, all of the attachments, and all information entered into the system. Applications with mixed languages will unfortunately be withdrawn from the process. So please complete the application completely in French or completely in English. Okay, building on that last slide, when you're completing the expression of interest document, it's important to use clear language and to address the points laid out in the template. We've built the template and specifically included the pieces of information that are most important for us to conduct an evaluation. And while our evaluation team consists of subject matter experts, if they can't decipher the information that's necessary to make a qualified assessment, or if the 10-page document is filled with extraneous information, for example, that review team collectively won't have the confidence necessary to move the application forward in the process. And speaking of the 10-page limit for the EOI document, I think it's also worth noting that this limit does not include letters of support. Letters of support are a requirement for this competition. Let me repeat that. Letters of support are a requirement for this competition and should be uploaded separately from the EOI document. Every application must be accompanied at least by a letter of support from both the required SME partner, small and medium-sized enterprise, and the required oil and gas producer partner for the project. And last, but certainly not least, please do not wait until the last day to submit your application. This is a matter of fairness to all applicants, and we are firm on it. We will not extend the deadline, and we will not accept late submissions. If you have technical issues during the submission process, it happens. We know it happens. We've seen it happen in the past. If you do have technical issues during the process, our team is happy to help resolve technical issues and is quite responsive to the requests that come in. However, I can tell you with certainty that if you wait until the last day, it's quite possible and quite likely, in fact, that we can't address all of the last minute issues that arise. And if you end up missing the deadline because of a technical issue, we will not accept it. So please submit your proposal well in advance of the deadline. Please go online, test the system, fill some things out, see if you have any technical issues, see if you can upload your submission, upload your document, and give it a try. And if you have technical issues, give our team an email or a phone call, and we're very much happy to help. All right, so in anticipation of some of the questions, we've prepared a frequently asked questions document I referred to already on the competition website. I think there's now 29 questions in that document, and we may add some more after today's webinar. So again, I encourage you to look at that document. As a supplement to the competition guide, it is a wealth of information and is worth your time to take a few minutes to look through. For now though, what I'll do is I'll take you through a small number of the most frequent questions we anticipate from that document. And then we'll move on in the next slide to open the floor for questions from the audience. So the first question here is whether or not the lead applicant needs to be incorporated in Canada and whether all project partners need to be Canadian. So yes, indeed, all lead applicant organizations must be incorporated. So if you're the applicant, if you're going online, filling out the application, submitting the expression of interest, you must be incorporated in Canada, and you also must be a member of CRIN. Now, projects may of course include partners from outside of Canada, but then just as a reminder, 90% or more of all total eligible project costs must be incurred in Canada for the project. All right, I touched on the second one earlier, but I think it's worth repeating just so everyone hears it one more time. The question is, can one applicant submit multiple applications? The quick answer, yes. You may submit more than one application to this competition, and you may also submit applications to multiple CRIN competitions. However, and this is really important, only one submission per project is permitted. You cannot get funding for the same project from multiple CRIN competitions or from multiple applications within a competition for that matter. Now, the last thing I'll say here is that we anticipate a large volume of applications and that the process will be highly competitive. So what I'd encourage you to do is, for lack of a better term, high grade your projects, so to speak. So only submit those that are best aligned with the focus and with the goals of the competition. Okay, so next up is an important question about IP ownership, and we just added this one in this morning. This is one that we're getting already. The question is, if a project is approved for funding, does the intellectual property become public? Now, the quick answer to that is no. Both background IP, of course, remains with its original owners, and then any IP developed over the course of a CRIN-funded project will be owned by the funding recipients through whatever IP arrangement is in place between the recipient and its partners. In other words, CRIN does not want to own any IP nor make it public. However, there are some important nuances, including a requirement that the IP is made available for use in Canada through fair and reasonable terms, and that the IP is not sold or exclusively licensed outside of Canada for at least 5 years after the project is complete. Now, there's more information in the competition guide, and these requirements will be detailed in the legal agreement between CRIN and the funding recipients. All right, I'll address one more question here quickly, and then we'll move on to the Q&A. And that question is whether project details are kept confidential throughout the entire application process, and whether they ultimately become public at some point in the future. So the simple answer to that is application details, the submissions that you provide, the expressions of interest and the full project proposals are kept confidential on a permanent basis, with the exception of a non-confidential summary that is shared publicly when CRIN's funding is announced for the successful applications. The CRIN team will work with the selected applicants at that stage to ensure the non-confidential summary is both up to date and accurate. And then at the end of funded projects, there will be public reporting of project outcomes and learnings. So there will be an element of the learnings and outcomes that become public ultimately at the completion of the project. All right, well, thank you very much for listening. And now this is your opportunity to ask questions. Please type your questions into the questions pane of the control panel, which is typically on the right-hand side of your screen. And while you're doing that, let me bring some others online that will be joining me for the Q&A session. First of all, to help answer questions, I will be joined by Ian Job and Danielle Tardif from the CRIN team. I'm just going to check that your microphones are turned on now and that you're connected to the audio. Hello, Ian, are you there?
I am.
Excellent. Hello, Danielle. Danielle, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Great, thanks Ian, thanks Danielle, perfect. And I'll also be joined by Michelle Gurney, who will be moderating the Q&A session. Michelle, are you there?
Mark, I'm here.
Perfect, well, thank you so much. I'm glad to be joined by the three of you. All right, so while you get your questions in, let me mention quickly that we will try to answer the questions that have the most value for the entire audience. So if you have questions about the competition, about the process, or anything that we've mentioned, or even about CRIN in general, that's great. If you have questions about the specific eligibility of your technology or your project, we probably won't get a chance to address those online in this webinar, but as I mentioned, you're welcome to follow up with us offline after the webinar is over. Okay, Michelle, over to you. What questions are coming in?
Thanks, Mark. I think we'll start out on the partnership theme because there are quite a few questions surrounding this. And I know that Janice has already been answering some of the questions in the question pane as well, but we'll take a few live because we think it's helpful for everybody to hear some of these answers. So Mark, the first one is, proposed projects must include at least one SME partner. Can the SME and a large multinational be related companies?
That's a great question. I saw that in the question box, and meaning affiliated subsidiaries, et cetera, and that came from Jacqueline. I think I'm going to have to take that one back and ask that question. I think that's a great question. We hadn't contemplated that one, but I think it's important. It can be. We can say that the SME and the oil producer is the same company, so one could argue that, yeah, that's affiliated. And so if you're small and an oil and gas producer, that's an eligible partnership.
Thanks very much,
Ian.
Sorry, Michelle, I might just jump in on that quickly. In addition to Ian's response, I would again maybe just remind everyone, there is a little bit of helpful language in addition to what's been mentioned in the competition guide document. And the one thing I wanted to mention is that for the individual partners, what we want to see for the SME partner and the oil and gas producer partner, what we want to see is a clear delineation and description of the roles in terms of the partnership and what each partner brings to the project, and the contribution to the project. So while that doesn't specifically answer the question, and I think Ian hit the nail on the head with his response, but keep that in mind that individual partners, whether it's the SME or the oil and gas producer, whether it's an affiliated company, a large multinational, needs to have a very clear and distinct role within the project and a distinct contribution to the project.
Right, and we'll do this tag team back and forth, folks. So I'll refer to you to section 2.5 in the guide, pages 6 and 7, where we do try to articulate what is an oil and gas producer. And this may answer Brian's question around biodiesel, et cetera. That said, and it's about being in the hydrocarbon space. So take a look. We've actually tried to look at upstream and midstream and downstream relationships, and take a look at that. And if you still have questions, please reach out to the emails that are provided in the guidebooks, either the CRIN Reducing Environmental Footprint at ERA Alberta or the info at cleanresourceinnovation.com.
Thanks, Ian and Mark. I'll just move to the next question we have here is, with the project partners, do they have to be aligned prior to the EOI submission, or can they form alliances after they're shortlisted? So an example of that is maybe even through project procurement.
Mark, maybe take a quick, I saw those questions. Maybe Mark, you can start with that, and then I'll backfill.
Yeah, for sure. I can offer a quick thought on that. Thanks very much, Michelle. That is an important question. If I understood the question correctly, it's around the forging of partnerships and the timing of forging such partnerships. What I would say is that in order to be eligible, and I'm repeating myself, and I apologize for that, but each project must have at minimum an SME partner and an oil and gas producer partner. Now, those partnerships, as an eligibility requirement, are necessary for the submission process at the time of submission of EOI. So for example, you couldn't submit as an SME alone or as a oil and gas producer alone in the hopes of finding the other partner throughout the process. Now, of course, if you've got those two partners and you make a submission, the other partnerships can be forged. The team can be fleshed out. Some things can evolve with the project over the course of the submission process, but as a minimum eligibility requirement, those two need to be in place. And that relates back in part to what I mentioned around the support letters. We require a support letter as an eligibility requirement from the SME partner and the oil and gas producer partner. So those need to be in place by the EOI submission deadline.
Excellent, thanks for that answer. So the next question has a theme along partnership as well, and this is CRIN offers partnership scouting support. Are you able to elaborate on this?
Certainly. Thanks, Michelle, and thanks, Lisa, for the question. I think what we've offered there is some more matchmaking, and Janice, who's on the line, will be taking your question queries through the information at cleanresourceinnovation.com, email around any questions or opportunities that you're looking for some matchmaking. And behind with Janice is a team of folks from the steering committee who are more than happy to connect you and try to connect you with possible partners, oil and gas producers. We have a lot of interest to make this happen, and we do have a mechanism in behind to help out as much as possible. So use the email info@cleanresourceinnovation.com and tell us your story and what you're looking for. Hopefully that answers the question.
That's great, Ian. Thanks so much. I was just looking at the questions, and there's actually two that I'll combine here. So the next one is, there was a question about who makes the ultimate funding decision. Is it CRIN or ERA? And then a follow-on to that is, if this competition is powered by ERA, are they also a trusted partner of CRIN? So I'll ask you to take both of those questions at once.
To be blunt, CRIN makes the decisions. The CRIN board will be making the ultimate decision, and then as a result of the funding, ISID, the Government of Canada, has the opportunity to comment as well. So it's a CRIN decision based on recommendations from a very competent partner, trusted partner in ERA. Yes, and similarly for the other competitions, we have trusted partners in the other competition coordinators as well, be it by Foresight or by Mars. Hopefully that answers that question.
That's great, Ian. Thank you for answering that. So the next one is, can you explain the 25% producer funding contribution? How do you define cash or in kind? And what are maybe some of the examples of types of allowable expenditures?
Mark, you want to take a first cut at that one? I saw that one.
Yeah, for sure. So I mentioned it briefly, but maybe I can mention again that if you look at the competition guide document, scroll down to page 15, Appendix 1 is a guide around eligible costs for the CRIN competition. And so in terms of eligible costs, there are a number of categories, including direct labor, subcontractors and consultants, direct materials, equipment, other direct costs, travel and outreach costs incurred by the ultimate recipients that are directly related to the project. I should note, while it doesn't, we don't have a detailed description of what exactly is considered in kind and what is not considered in kind. We do clarify that in kind contributions are not considered eligible contributions. And there is a list it's in fact a longer list than the eligible costs, simply because of the specificity, but there's a list in the competition guide. If you scroll down to page 17 of ineligible costs, there's a number of them. I won't go through them here, but just as a couple examples, interest paid or payable on capital bonds or debentures, legal accounting or consultant fees, losses on investments, losses on projects or contracts, federal or provincial income taxes, and there's a number of others.
Thanks to you both for that one. There are a few questions just looking for clarity on the IP question again, Mark. And one of the more specific questions is, the IP agreement requires continued ownership. Does that preclude investment in the company that would dilute ownership of that IP?
Sorry, Michelle, could you repeat the question just to make sure I fully understand?
Certainly. The IP agreement requires continued ownership. Does that preclude investment in the company that would dilute ownership of the IP?
Yeah, I may not be fully understanding the premise of the question, but the essence is that background IP is retained by the original owners. Any intellectual property developed during the project will be owned in accordance with whatever IP arrangements between the recipient and its project partners. And so there's no requirement per se on CRIN's part with respect to exactly who owns that intellectual property. And so if an investor or a partner comes in and the IP arrangement changes between the recipient and its partners, that's fine. The essence of the point is that CRIN will not be owning any of that intellectual property, does not want to own any of that intellectual property, but there are some requirements, as I mentioned, with respect to ensuring that IP is made available through fair and reasonable terms, and that IP is not exclusively licensed outside of Canada for a period of, at a minimum, 5 years from the time of project completion.
Thanks, Mark. And maybe I'll just throw this out there. If you feel like a question has not been answered or that we weren't clear in how we asked the question, don't hesitate to put the question back in the question pane and we will try that again. So
and that's fair. And Michelle, I just wrote that note down myself, actually, and we might take a more wholesome approach to that question in the FAQ in the next few days.
Great, thank you. So there's another great question here. I am going to jump back to partnership for a moment. And this question is, are we able to partner with an Indigenous group and a producer? Is that allowed?
Yes. I think so, absolutely. If I understand the question, if I understand the question, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it was not explicitly listed on the slide, and I may have mentioned, but perhaps I didn't make clear that it's not an exhaustive list. We would very much welcome and encourage Indigenous participation in the projects.
Great, thanks for that. This question I'm less familiar with, so I might need you, Ian, to provide a little bit of clarity. The question came in at 11:45 and it said, will there be CRIN support throughout the application process? CRIN's partner seminars showcases their interests so technology solutions companies can do a meet and greet. I don't think I have that. Do you understand that question?
A meet and greet. Maybe that's sort of a complementary to the question that was asked before about the matchmaking. I guess if there's any questions or any wishes to match make, please send your request to information at info@cleanresourceinnovation.com as a start. I'd also like to add, if you're interested to understand who are CRIN members, please join, sign the social contract, and once you've signed up at cleanresourceinnovation.com, join, and you can search the membership directory quite readily by company name to find out who are members of CRIN and what companies as a result are engaged with CRIN. So those are two different approaches to understand what those matches might look like and how you might approach it.
Thanks, Ian, for providing a little more clarity there. I do have a question here on, is there a requirement in the submission to quantify and verify the emission reductions?
If you go ahead, Mark. I was going to direct them to the guide again.
My apologies. Yeah. No, go ahead, Ian. I'm happy to jump in after you.
Well, I would offer to take a peek at section 5.2 of the guide. That's page 12, and it talks about the criteria. I think as much as information that you're able to provide at the UI stage to create and understand the value that your project brings to the table will help the reviewers understand the merits of your project and help score the project accordingly and understand if it's worthy of continued investment going forward to the next stage of the competition. As much as you can, it's welcome.
Yeah, and it's, I'll just add on to that very quickly. It will be important, particularly as we move to the full project proposal stage, that that the environmental benefits, not just greenhouse gas reductions, but the environmental benefits are quantifiable and verifiable. And we'll be digging into that more so at the full project proposal stage. And of course, after projects are awarded for funding, but quantification of the potential for greenhouse gas benefits and environmental benefits is an important component of the evaluation process.
Great, thanks for that. I am going to go back to IP for a moment here because there were some additional questions related to this. And one is specifically referencing the IP agreement, which states that the IP cannot be sold to a non-Canadian entity for 5 years, which appears to preclude a company from being purchased for 5 years. This could substantially limit the development trajectory of a company if they cannot consider non-Canadian acquisition. Can you explain the reason for that?
That is a condition that the government of Canada has put on these funds. And I don't, it's conditional to this agreement that we have with the ISED, as well as therefore handed and transferred down to the ultimate recipients who condition of the funding.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, that if there are some specific questions that maybe don't appear to be captured, there are some nuances that don't appear to be captured by the statements that are in the competition guide document, we're happy to have follow-up conversations and dig into that. I don't know if we can address every nuance here on the line, but I do think we have the ability to follow up afterward and ensure that we can answer the questions that you have specifically.
Creating that clarity for the asker. Yep.
Thanks to you both. I just want to do a little bit of a time check here. It is 11:55, so I think we've got time for one or two more questions. Is CCUS included in this program? And also there was a question about biodiesel.
CCUS and biodiesel is probably better aligned to the low emission fuels and products competition. If you take a look at that on the Foresight website, you'll learn more about CCUS, which is clearly articulated, as well as the biodiesel and these other value-added products are part of that competition. And that gets back to another question, which competition that was asked. And if you've got any questions around what's the best alignment for your projects, please do reach out to the CRIN reducing environmental footprint at eraalberta.ca to understand what is the best competition to put your submission into. And as Mark's mentioned earlier too, is that do put your best foot forward, and put your best application forward into the competition that's best aligned to what you're trying to achieve. Anything to add on that one, Mark?
No, thanks very much, Ian. Completely agree with you. Nothing to add.
Michelle, anything else? There's been lots of questions. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. There's so many. There are so many good questions here, and several comments related to the IP and some concerns about the IP factors that are being considered here through the competition. So I know there'll be some additional follow-up there. So we are seeing that in the questions. Thanks for that.
Wow, the engagement's high. I just scrolling down and wow, there's lots. It's wonderful.
Yeah, so maybe the last question I'll put out here, and I don't know if we have an answer to this, is through this competition, do the participating companies and projects that gain CRIN funding, are they recognized for ESG efforts? Is that a question we can answer, Mark or Ian?
ESG efforts, yeah, I don't know. Other than I think everything that we're doing here today and being part is part of ESG efforts. I guess we need to understand more what you mean by ESG efforts and tell us more about what that means to you, and maybe we can answer that more wholesomely offline.
Agreed.
Do you have time for one more, Mark?
Yep, we have time for one more.
Okay, let's make this the last one. I'm just seeing this question came in at 11:56. So thanking you both and the whole team for the discussion. they're asking, can you please comment on when a hydrocarbon extraction project is evaluated? What kind of weighting or consideration is given to the environmental benefits, such as tailings, other than the CO2 emissions?
Mark, I'll let you can start there with looking at the criteria on section 5.2, if you wanted to speak to that.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks very much, Ian. I was going to say the exact same thing, that if you look in the competition guide at section 5.2, it talks about the evaluation criteria, the merit criteria upon which the expressions of interest will be evaluated. And in there, you can see that the impact of the projects, at least at the expression of interest stage, is bundled together. And so that talks about environmental benefits, economic benefits, as well as public and social benefits. And within environmental benefits, it talks about significant sustainable greenhouse gas reductions in Canada by 2033 toward CRIN's target of 100 megatons by 2033. But it also talks about positive cumulative environmental impacts such as freshwater consumption, land use intensity and improvements, energy intensity, reclamation, and improved ecology and biodiversity. So all of these things are important and contribute toward the overall impact that a proposed project can have. I don't know if you want to add to that, Ian.
No, I think perhaps if the asker can take a peek at that, and if there's still some unanswered questions or further queries, is to reach out to us, and we'll do our best to answer your questions.
All right. Well, thanks, Michelle. If it's all right, I think we've got 1 minute left. I should move on and mention the wrap up and next steps. So thank you very much. That brings us to the end of this webinar. I would say thank you for everyone's interest and participation today. As Ian mentioned, if you do have unanswered questions after the webinar and after reviewing the supporting documentation, including the competition guide and the FAQ document, you're most welcome to email us at the CRIN Reducing Environmental Footprint email address shown here, as well as the info@CRIN email address that Ian mentioned. We hope to have the webinar posted to the ERA website by the end of this week. And so on behalf of CRIN and ERA, thank you once again and have a wonderful day.